Have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected, only to see karma unfold right before your eyes? In today's story, a small-town diner refused to serve an elderly man because of his appearance. What they didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary elderly gentleman had saved dozens of lives in his prime. Stay with me until the end to see how this fire chief's act of recognition changed everything in a matter of minutes. Welcome to Honor Echoes, where we share powerful stories of veterans whose sacrifices echo through time. If you value respect, honor, and powerful human moments, this channel is for you. Before we dive into today's remarkable story, hit that subscribe button to join our community that keeps the legacy of our heroes alive. It was a chilly October morning in the small town of Millfield, Connecticut. The kind of morning where frost clings to windshields and breath forms small clouds in the air. I was sitting in Rosie's Diner, a local establishment that had been serving the community for over 40 years. The place was nothing special to look at: worn vinyl booths, laminated menus with coffee stains, and the perpetual smell of bacon and maple syrup. But it was an institution in our town, a gathering place for everyone from high school students to retired factory workers. I was there meeting with my friend Sarah for our weekly breakfast catch-up. We would order the same thing every time: pancakes for her, eggs Benedict for me, and spend an hour talking about our lives, our families, and occasionally, the town gossip. That day, however, our routine was interrupted by something that would change how I viewed my community forever. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked an elderly man I'd never seen before. He must have been in his mid-80s, with thinning white hair and shoulders that stooped slightly forward. He wore a weathered navy blue jacket that seemed at least 2 decades old, faded khaki pants that were a bit too short, and worn-out work boots. His face was deeply lined, telling the story of a life lived outdoors, and his hands were gnarled and spotted with age. What caught my attention most, though, was the small pin on his jacket, a firefighter's badge, tarnished with age, but still recognizable. It was positioned right next to what looked like a military service pin, though I couldn't make out which branch from where I was sitting. The old man made his way slowly to the counter, each step deliberate and measured. The diner wasn't particularly busy that morning, just a few regulars scattered among the booths and 2 teenage waitresses who seemed more interested in their phones than in providing service. "Excuse me," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. "Could I get some coffee and maybe see a menu?" What happened next made my blood boil. Tiffany, the younger of the 2 waitresses, glanced up from her phone and gave the old man a once-over. She whispered something to Jessica, the other waitress, and they both snickered. Then, with a level of disrespect that shocked me, Tiffany approached the counter. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we're actually pretty busy right now. The coffee shop down the street might be more your speed." The old man looked around at the half-empty diner, confusion crossing his weathered face. "I just want some breakfast," he said simply. "I've been driving since 4 a.m., and I could really use some food and coffee." Jessica joined her colleague at the counter. "We have a lot of orders to prepare for our regulars," she lied. "And honestly, we're not sure you'd be comfortable here." What they meant was clear to everyone in the diner. They didn't want to serve him because of how he looked. They had decided, based on his old clothes and weathered appearance, that he wasn't the type of customer they wanted to deal with. I was about to get up and say something. My parents had raised me better than to sit quietly while someone was being mistreated, when Sarah grabbed my arm and nodded toward the door. The bell had jingled again, and this time, a tall man in his 50s had entered. He wore a crisp uniform with the insignia of the Millfield Fire Department, and the gold badge on his chest identified him as Chief Robert Anderson. Chief Anderson was something of a local hero. He'd been with the department for 30 years and had personally led the rescue efforts during the mill fire of 2011, saving 17 people from certain death. He was respected throughout the community, known for his integrity and no-nonsense approach to leadership. The chief scanned the diner, and when his eyes landed on the old man at the counter, something remarkable happened. His stern expression transformed, his eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed frozen in place. Then, with purposeful strides, He crossed the diner, completely ignoring the waitresses who had suddenly perked up and put their phones away. "Captain Miller," Chief Anderson said, his voice filled with disbelief and something that sounded a lot like reverence. "Captain Thomas Miller. From Station 27 in Hartford." The old man turned, squinting slightly as he studied the chief's face. Then, recognition dawned, and a smile spread across his weathered features. "Bobby Anderson," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Little Bobby Anderson. Well, I'll be damned." What happened next is something I'll never forget. Chief Anderson, a man known for his stoic demeanor, reached out and took the old man's hand in both of his. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the diner, he bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. "Sir," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "it is an honor to see you again." The diner had gone completely silent. Even Tiffany and Jessica stood motionless, their expressions a mixture of confusion and growing unease. Chief Anderson turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I'd like to introduce you to Captain Thomas Miller. 40 years ago, when I was just a rookie, this man ran into a burning apartment building in Hartford to save a family trapped on the 5th floor. The building was about to collapse, and every other firefighter had been ordered to evacuate. But Captain Miller went back in." The chief's voice grew thick with emotion. "He saved a mother and her 3 children that day. One of those children was me." A collective gasp went through the diner. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms as I realized the significance of what was unfolding before us. "Not only that," Chief Anderson continued, "but Captain Miller is a decorated Vietnam veteran who earned the Silver Star for valor in combat. After serving his country, he spent 35 years in the fire service, saving countless lives and mentoring generations of firefighters, including myself." He turned back to Captain Miller, who was looking slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "Captain," the chief said, "would you do me the honor of joining me for breakfast? Anything you want, on me." The old man, Captain Miller, smiled warmly. "I'd like that, Bobby, and please, call me Tom. You've earned that right." Chief Anderson guided Captain Miller to the best booth in the house, the one by the large window with a view of the town square. As they walked past the counter, he stopped and fixed the 2 waitresses with a stern look. "These tables need water, clean utensils, and menus," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "And I expect the best service you're capable of providing. Is that clear?" The transformation in the waitresses was immediate and almost comical. They scrambled to prepare the table, bringing fresh napkins, polished silverware, and menus that hadn't seen the light of day in what seemed like ages, the special menus reserved for important visitors to the town. As Captain Miller and Chief Anderson settled into their booth, I couldn't help but overhear parts of their conversation. Captain Miller had been driving through town on his way to visit his daughter in Massachusetts. He had stopped in Millfield because, decades ago, he had helped fight a major fire at the old textile mill, and he wanted to see how the town had recovered. Chief Anderson was filling him in on his career, telling him about his wife and children, and repeatedly expressing how Captain Miller's example had shaped his approach to firefighting and leadership. "Everything I know about courage and duty," I heard him say, "I learned from watching you." What struck me most was Captain Miller's humility. When Chief Anderson mentioned the apartment fire rescue, Captain Miller shook his head. "I was just doing my job," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, sir," Chief Anderson replied firmly. "Not anyone. That's the point." The news of Captain Miller's presence spread through the diner like wildfire. And soon, other patrons began approaching their table. An elderly woman tearfully thanked him for his service. A middle-aged man shared that his father had been a firefighter who had trained under Captain Miller in the 1980s. A young mother brought her small son over and whispered to him that he was meeting a real hero. Tiffany and Jessica, meanwhile, were experiencing what I can only describe as a crash course in humility and respect. They hovered around the table, refilling coffee cups before they were half empty, bringing extra sides that hadn't been ordered, and repeatedly asking if everything was to their satisfaction. Their previous disdain had been replaced by a mixture of shame and desperate eagerness to make amends. Captain Miller, for his part, treated them with kindness and dignity, far more than they had shown him. "Thank you, young lady," he would say with each refill or extra side. "This is very thoughtful of you." As the breakfast stretched into the late morning, more people from town began arriving at the diner, having heard through phone calls and text messages about the distinguished visitor. The mayor appeared, as did several off-duty firefighters, all eager to meet the man who had influenced Chief Anderson so profoundly. What had begun as a simple breakfast had transformed into an impromptu celebration of service, sacrifice, and the invisible threads that connect one generation to the next. And through it all, Captain Miller maintained his humble demeanor, seemingly surprised by all the attention, but gracious in receiving it. Around noon, as the gathering showed no signs of dispersing, someone suggested moving to the fire station for a proper reception. Chief Anderson looked to Captain Miller, who nodded with a smile. "I'd like to see how you run your department, Bobby," he said. "If it's anything like you as a firefighter, I'm sure it's first-rate." As they prepared to leave, I noticed Captain Miller reach for his wallet. Chief Anderson put a hand on his arm. "Your money's no good here, Captain," he said firmly. "Not today, not ever." But Captain Miller shook his head. He placed several bills on the table, more than enough to cover their meal many times over. Then, he looked directly at Tiffany and Jessica. "For your education fund," he said kindly. "Everyone deserves a second chance to make a first impression." The two waitresses, who had been hovering nearby, looked stricken. Tiffany's eyes welled with tears, and Jessica looked down at her shoes, unable to meet the old man's gaze. "Thank you, sir," Tiffany managed to say. "I'm so sorry for how we treated you." Captain Miller nodded. "Life's full of lessons, young lady. Some are harder to learn than others. Just remember, you never know a person's story until you take the time to hear it." As they made their way to the door, the entire diner rose in a spontaneous standing ovation. Captain Miller paused, visibly moved by the display of respect. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, then allowed Chief Anderson to guide him outside. I watched through the window as they crossed the street to the fire station. The younger man walking slowly to match the elder's pace, occasionally placing a supportive hand on his back when they encountered uneven pavement. They were joined by a growing procession of townspeople, all eager to extend their welcome to the man who had quietly shaped their community's protector. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the fire station on my way home from work. The impromptu reception was still going strong. Captain Miller was seated in a chair of honor, surrounded by firefighters of all ages, sharing stories and wisdom from his decades of service. Chief Anderson never left his side, his face alight with pride and gratitude. I learned that the department had hastily arranged for Captain Miller to stay the night in our town's best bed and breakfast, and that plans were already underway for a more formal recognition ceremony before he continued his journey to Massachusetts. As I was leaving, I overheard a young firefighter ask Captain Miller for the secret to his long and distinguished career. The old man thought for a moment, then answered simply, "Show up, do the right thing, especially when it's hard. And remember that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." His eyes drifted to where Tiffany and Jessica stood at the edge of the gathering. They had arrived a few minutes earlier, still in their diner uniforms, looking uncertain about their welcome. Captain Miller gave them a warm smile and motioned for them to come closer. "These young ladies," he said to the group, "taught me something important today. They reminded me that we all make mistakes, and we all deserve the chance to make things right." The next day, as Captain Miller prepared to continue his journey, the entire fire department turned out to see him off. Chief Anderson presented him with a plaque commemorating his influence on the Millfield Fire Department and his lifetime of service. The local newspaper was there to capture the moment, ensuring that Captain Miller's story would become part of our town's history. But perhaps the most poignant moment came just before he left. Tiffany and Jessica approached him, each carrying a small gift bag. Inside were handwritten letters of apology and small firefighter medallions they had purchased from the department's gift shop. "We'll never forget what you taught us, Captain Miller," Jessica said, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "about respect and second chances." Captain Miller accepted their gifts with grace. "And I won't forget your kindness today," he replied. "Sometimes life's greatest lessons come from our most humbling moments." As his car pulled away, escorted to the town limits by a fire engine with lights flashing, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had changed. In less than 24 hours, a man who had been deemed unworthy of service had been revealed as a hero whose influence had shaped lives for decades. And all it had taken was one person who knew his value to change everything. In the weeks that followed, Rosie's Diner underwent a transformation of its own. The owner, deeply embarrassed by how Captain Miller had been treated, instituted a new policy. Firefighters, police officers, EMTs, and veterans eat at half price. Photos of local first responders and military personnel now lined the walls, creating a visual reminder of the service and sacrifice that often go unrecognized. Tiffany and Jessica kept their jobs, but they were required to undergo training on respectful customer service. More importantly, they were assigned to work closely with the diner's most elderly regular customers, learning their stories and needs. Last I heard, both young women had signed up for community college courses, Tiffany in nursing and Jessica in emergency management. As for Chief Anderson, he established an annual award in Captain Miller's name, given to the firefighter who best exemplifies the qualities of courage, humility, and compassion. The first recipient, chosen personally by the chief, was a young woman who had joined the department just 6 months earlier but had already distinguished herself through her dedication to the community's most vulnerable residents, and me. I learned something valuable that day at Rosie's Diner. I learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms or medals. Sometimes, they wear weathered jackets and worn-out boots. Sometimes, they sit quietly at diner counters, carrying with them stories of courage and sacrifice that remain untold until someone recognizes their worth. I also learned about the ripple effect of recognition, how one person's acknowledgement of another's value can transform not just lives but an entire community. Chief Anderson didn't just honor Captain Miller that day. He reminded all of us of our capacity to see beyond appearances, to recognize the dignity in every person we encounter. Since that day, I've made it a point to learn the names and stories of the elderly people I meet. I've discovered that behind many stooped shoulders and weathered faces lie tales of extraordinary courage, kindness, and resilience, tales that deserve to be heard, honored, and preserved. And whenever I find myself forming a quick judgment based on someone's appearance, I remember Captain Miller's words, "You never know a person's story until you take the time to hear it." In our fast-paced world of snap judgments and instant dismissals, perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. This story of Captain Miller and Chief Anderson reminds us that respect isn't just something we give. It's something we earn through recognizing the value in others. At Honor Echoes, we believe that every veteran has a story worth telling and honoring. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're helping us preserve and share these powerful reminders of courage, service, and the profound impact of simple human recognition. Hit that subscribe button now, and join us in ensuring that the echoes of honor continue to resonate for generations to come. Until next time, remember, behind every veteran is a story that deserves to be heard.